governor said to the ambassador, is, if you're the Chinese, and you think to yourself, okay, the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, they might take out Israel, is that in the primary interest of Beijing? No. They might mess up the Americans, would that be okay? Yes. I mean, the Chinese don't see any existential threat to them from the Iranians. It's just, they're not committed to a worldwide stability, they're committed to gradually weaken America. They want the world market to exist, they're not stupid. But these are not primary threats to them, it's not part of their value system. What I tell people about the Iranian thing is basically two steps. If you are an Israeli prime minister, and you remember the Holocaust, and you think about the death of millions of Jews, and you look at the idea that 2 or 3 nuclear weapons is a Holocaust. Israel is a very small country, very urban population, no more than 3 nuclear weapons would be required to equal a Holocaust. And you say to yourself, am I going to take the risk of presiding over the second Holocaust, which would mean, for all practical purposes, virtually the end of Judaism on the planet? They're not going to take the risk. So then the question becomes real simple. You call the American president and you say, I have these 2 planning choices. If you will help me, I'll go conventional. If you don't help me, I'm using as many nuclear missiles as I need to take out the Iranians. So you decide whether or not you want to be the guy who sat to one side while the nuclear war occurred with all the consequences. Or you help me. But what I won't do is I will not allow Israel to be subjected to the threat of a Holocaust. And then the American president's going to have a big decision to make. And I think this is I agree with Governor Huntsman, this is a not very far down the road decision. My first official meeting with a foreign leader after I became Speaker, I was not yet sworn in, it was in December. And Speaker Foley called me and said that Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was coming to the States where I see him. And in December of '94, we sat down, and the former Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Force, Prime Minister, and he said to me, Iran is an existential threat to Israel, and we cannot deal with it by ourselves, it is too big. The reason I am so desperately trying to reach a deal with the Palestinians is to clear the space to focus on Iran. Now that was 17 years ago. And we still haven't cleared the space to deal directly with Iran. And the clock is running, and I think I agree with the formulation the governor had. This is the biggest national security threat of the next 10 years. China is a challenge in the long run, and not necessarily a threat, but a challenge, largely economic and technological. Iran is the problem of the near future.
Last words, Governor?
I would just say there will be talk about additional sanctions with respect to the relationship with Iran. My sense is that will do no good at all. The President will go out and talk about layer after layer of sanctions. It's been tried for a while. It won't work because the mullahs in Iran have already decided they want to go nuclear. And the Chinese and the Russians, who are the key members of the UN Security Council, aren't going to do it. They're not going to work with us. So you've got sanctions in place right now. In order for the sanctions to have any impact whatsoever beyond that which has already been done, would be to go down to the annex portion of the sanctions, and to be able to list specific names, trading houses, companies, banks, that then you're willing to sanction. China can do that for. They like the flowery oratory language, the Russians to some extent do as well. When you get down to the specifics of citing individuals, that's just not going to happen. So I think we all need to conclude that this is going to be the United States doing it our way at the end of the day, which isn't all bad. I think we work better. We work better when left to our own devices. With respect to Israel, when you look longer term, at some point we all have to figure out how to improve the regime. We're kind of in tactical mode right now. You look at the Middle East, you say, we got Israel as our centerpiece relationship. We want to make sure we remind the world what it means to be a friend and ally, and maximize the values that are inherent in that bilateral relationship. And beyond that, you say there's Iran, the transcendent challenge of the decade, and Syria, because they're a subsidiary, and on the brink of disaster today anyway, the conduit through which you get a lot of material and support for Hamas and Hezbollah, a regime now with Assad that doesn't have much more than the support of southern Lebanon and Iran. And you have to say, we're in tactical thinking mode. Longer term, how do you put the pieces back together again? And I think that's where the U.S.-Israel relationship is going to important. Why? Because we have a free trade agreement with Israel. It's the oldest we have as a nation, goes back to 1975. And so why do we have, just take Iran off the table for now, why the Arab Spring? Why the uncertainty playing out? Not unlike the end of the Ottoman Empire, say 1919, or the events of 1948. It is that way because you have two things at play, I do believe. One, you have the problem of long-standing dictators who just wouldn't go away, whether Tunisia, Egypt, Libya. And second, you have real population discontent. You had no economic growth, no opportunity, no possibility for jobs in parts of North Africa and the Middle East. So what to do? You know, you rise up. You join these causes to take on the long-standing dictator. And I think longer term, the only way we're going to begin putting some of these pieces back together is by doing what this country has not done in a very long time, and that's beginning to hold the levers of economic power. We don't do trade agreements anymore. We need to. We don't engage on investment in international economic relationships anymore. I think Israel provides a very powerful opportunity to take that free trade agreement, to expand it beyond, and have it spill over and impact some of the region that today we see through a lens that's very troubling. But longer term, we're going to have to, as people, say, how do we begin putting those pieces back together? How do we bring stability and predictability and opportunity